Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel ran by the guy who's just kind of really going with the flow. And today I kind of want to talk about what's probably the wildest story to ever come from a Canadian soldier in World War II. I'm a bit of a history nerd and I really like, these kind of weird out there stories, and this one just it's almost unbelievable because it's about Leo Major, the man who is also known as the One-Eyed Ghost, and he's probably the closest we'll ever get to having a real-life Rambo. Not only is he one of only 3 British Commonwealth soldiers to ever receive the Distinguished Conduct Medal, but he's the only Canadian to earn it, and on top of that, he got it twice, during 2 separate wars. And I just kind of want to talk about his early life a bit, some of the shenanigans he got into during the war, and the actual events that led to him receiving the medals. This dude's stories are absolutely bonkers. It's almost unbelievable with just the craziness of everything that he did. So with the introduction out of the way, thank you for watching, and let's talk about an unfriendly Canadian. So Leo Major was born in January of 1921 in Massachusetts to French-Canadian parents who moved back to Quebec shortly after he was born. I couldn't really find much on his early life, but what I was able to find is that he didn't really get along with his dad that well. Eventually it led to him moving to live with an aunt, and it's thought that between the strained relationship with his father and trouble finding work at the time, Leo eventually joined the army when he was 19. It's also cited that he joined the army to become someone that, quote, his father could be proud of, which, that's a little depressing. I mean, that's but hey, I think it worked out for him. Leo was assigned to the Regiment de la Chaudière, Regiment de la Chaudière. Hang on, let me find out how you pronounce this.
Régiment de la Chaudière. Régiment de la Chaudière.
Yeah, that unit, how that's pronounced, which is nothing really fancy, was just a basic infantry line unit, but they had a really fancy French name because they were based out of Quebec. Either way, when he joined, he was assigned as a recon scout. He would eventually take part in the invasion of Normandy in June of 1944, during which he came across a German half-track in complete working order. It was unmanned, it was unsupervised, it was just lying out there, so he did what any reasonable person would do, and he took it, and just drove away completely by himself. And fast forward a bit, he wouldn't see any actual fighting until a few days after he stole the half-track, when he came across an SS patrol where he killed all 4 German troops on patrol, but not before one of the soldiers was able to ignite a phosphorus grenade, which resulted in Leo losing an eye, which is just probably one of the most painful things imaginable, because if you don't know about phosphorus, the way it works is it's like a chemical reaction type deal, where it just burns incessantly and painfully. It's typically used to ignite fires and destroy vehicles, and it's not like a typical fire where you can just, pour water on it or do something like that. You have to completely remove all oxygen from it, otherwise it won't stop burning. You want a good example of how it looks? I'm pretty sure We Were Soldiers has a scene where guys get phosphorus dropped on them, and that kind of shows what you have to do. Typically when you do have to treat it, or the fastest way to treat it, is taking a knife and cutting it out. But losing an eye would not stop Leo, because after all, the Canadian Army was like, hey, so you just took phosphorus to the face, you lost an eye, we're gonna send you home. And he argued that because he was a scout sniper, he only needed one eye to shoot, and he was still able to fight. And the army was just kind of like, okay, I mean, yeah, you are technically correct, yes, so sure. And one thing I just want to mention, because I think it's kind of funny, is that it's documented that Leo actually liked not having an eye, because he said it made him look like a pirate. And I just think that's really funny. After the invasion of Normandy, the Allied forces started pushing east into France, and then north into Holland and the Netherlands. Fast forward a bit to the campaign in the Netherlands. During the Battle of Scheldt, Leo was doing a recon patrol on his own when he came across 2 German soldiers He managed to be able to capture one and was going to use that guy as bait to lure out the other guy, but it didn't work, so we ended up just having to shoot the second soldier he came across. Eventually, Leo managed to capture the German commanding officer, who would only surrender after Leo shot and killed 3 of his men, which is just like, I don't know, the way I see that happening is he was able to like trap him at a farmhouse or something and just tell him like, hey, so you're gonna surrender all your men to me, and the guy's like, no, I'm not. So he just shot a dude in the room and was like, okay, now you're gonna surrender, because like, no, I'm not, and just kind of back and forth with that, and the officer was just kind of like, okay, I surrender to this fucking one-eyed dude, and it worked somehow. Because he was able to capture about 100 freaking German soldiers. And the crazy thing is, he wasn't even out scouting for enemy troops when all this took place. He was actually looking for other Allied soldiers that went missing. And he just happened to capture these guys. Just imagine the confusion on people's faces. You send a dude out to find like a group of buddies, and he comes back with a bunch of enemies captured. While he was escorting these German forces back to Canadian lines, they were actually spotted by SS troops who began open firing on the German prisoners. But Leo just kind of ignored them and kept walking on his way back to Canadian lines. He literally, like the reports go that they open fired. He literally didn't even acknowledge it and just said, keep walking, and just kept walking through the woods. On his way back to friendly lines, he passed a Canadian tank and told them, like, hey, yeah, so, there's some SS dudes down there. They shot a couple of my prisoners. You want to just go ahead and blow them up for me? Can you hook me up with that, bud? For his actions of capturing roughly about 100 German soldiers, Leo was put in to receive his first Distinguished Conduct Medal, which is the U.S. equivalent to the Silver Star. But this is where the embellishing and multiple accounts of his actions begin to actually take place, because he didn't receive the medal for this, and it's kind of disputed on why that's the case. One report is that he actually personally refused the medal because he thought the general that was going to actually present it to him was incompetent and unfit to award medals for valor in combat. And the other more common report is that he not only was put in for the medal, but he got 7 days of leave for capturing these Germans, and he decided to go to Belgium for a week. And he was just kind of late coming back to the war because of car trouble, and that's why they didn't give him the medal. So that's why they didn't give him the medal, and he was actually supposedly really upset he didn't get to meet the general that would have presented it to him. Which is just kind of like, yeah, I mean, you're late to formation, and like they're gonna punish you, but I mean, to deny a whole medal for like valor and like actions in combat that's a little extreme to me. I'm honestly not entirely sure which is true, but according to his sons, he wasn't a very patriotic or enthusiastic about awards in general. He just kind of saw the higher cause of like, oh hey, these Germans are bad people and we should stop them. He wasn't really fighting for like country or medals or awards or anything like that. So that leads me to believe that he really did just tell this officer like, no, I don't want it because it's coming from you, because he did accept the later 2 medals he wanted to receive it. But where most of the exaggerations and embellishments from his actions happen is the Battle of Zuel in April of 1945, which is where he actually received his first Distinguished Conduct Medal. And I'm going to try to keep to the facts, but there's a point where everything just kind of gets blurred. See, what is known for a fact is that Leo and a guy named Willie volunteered to recon the town of Zuel before the Canadians actually started an artillery barrage and invasion with their forces. All they were supposed to do was sneak in, get a rough estimate size of how many Germans were in the town, and kind of like key vital positions of theirs, and if possible make contact with the Dutch resistance. But once Willie and Leo actually got their eyes on the village, they thought that it was a very beautiful place, and they wanted to do everything in their power to keep it from being destroyed, so they decided they were just going to capture it themselves. It's also known that at some point Willie was shot and killed early on during their mission after he accidentally exposed a position. And while Leo did return fire and kill some of the German troops, he didn't get all of them. But after Willie's death, Leo decided, you know what, I'm still going to push through and complete the job and save the city on my own. And this is where things kind of get a little confusing. What is known is that Leo went into the town as well and liberated it single-handedly. And the next morning, he came back at around 9 a.m. and reported to his officials that, hey, the town is free. But no one really is 100% sure on how he did this. There are two major variations of the story they have some similarities, but they heavily conflict with his methods. A official report from the Canadian Army and some local papers from within Canada roughly tell the events as Leo entered the village with 2 Sten SMGs and a bunch of grenades. He captured a car and its driver, made the driver basically bob and weave through the town with a white flag over the car, while Leo was just kind of going through and attacking German soldiers and fortified positions as he saw them. More or less, he just kind of went in guns blazing and tricked the Germans into thinking he was an entire battalion invading the village, causing them to get scared and run away. Once the Germans began to flee, Leo just happened to run into the resistance leadership, and he told the resistance, hey, get the people into the street, have them take over the town. And by that point, the Germans were already in full retreat, so this also allowed them to take over the local radio station and announce Zoel had been liberated to the people. Bear in mind, all this was going on at 1, 2 in the morning. After the town had been liberated the following morning, the Dutch organized transportation for Leo to go back to Canadian lines so he could return Willie's body. And during that car ride, they actually started taking friendly fire from the Canadians, so Leo had to stand on the roof of a truck so they wouldn't get shot at. Now, this version of the story is where Leo gets the nickname of Canadian Rambo or real life Rambo, but it's probably not that accurate. For one, a lot of the reports that follow this line have thought that he made himself a one-man army shooting anything that moved, state that he was also just burning buildings for no reason whatsoever, which conflicts with the entire reason he and Willie decided to take the town on their own. Remember, they were just supposed to recon the town and get an estimate size of the German force in the area, and then report that back to their unit so that the artillery would actually have some pre-designated targets so that they knew where to fire before the actual army invaded the town. But they decided to go against that because, they thought the town was very pretty. So at least to me, setting fire to half the town and just randomly throwing grenades into different buildings contradicts the whole reason why he decided to go in by himself. Not only that, the only building that's known to have been burned down during this entire ordeal, shebang, whatever you want to call it, was the police headquarters, which the Gestapo had been using as their own little base of operations. But it's also more likely that the Germans themselves burnt that down on their way out, not Leo or any of the resistance fighters or locals, because it was standard procedure for the Germans to execute prisoners and burn everything in order to cover a paper trail and make sure that, nothing would be able to link back to them. Plus, a curator for a paper based out of Zoel claimed to have searched through the police reports of the night Leo liberated the town, and he found no reports of any civil unrest. But I would take that with a bit of a grain of salt because only one paper claimed that was the case, and two, again, the only building that's known to be destroyed was the police station. Other reports, which I think are a bit more accurate, go somewhere along the lines of he snuck into the town on his own. He was able to capture a German staff car and its chauffeur, which had been parked in front of a tavern, so he snuck inside the tavern, eventually captured the officers inside there. Well, I shouldn't say capture, he had a standoff with one of the officers, and actually found out that he wasn't German, but he was French, and not really that committed to the Germans. So, Leo basically told the dude, hey, you should go back home, not only because there are way more Canadians coming, but the war was basically over for Germany. You lost, get away while you still can. I'm giving you a chance to get away with your life. Keep in mind, all this was happening in mid-April of 1945. At the same time, the Soviets were laying siege to Berlin, and Germany was going to surrender less than a month after all this happened. So the German army was, in fact, collapsing in on itself at this point. So he gave this guy an opportunity to, take the money and run, basically. Which he did take it, and he let that officer get away. There are several reports, including an interview Leo did with a Zowelian radio program. After the talk in the tavern, Leo then backtracked out of the city and just kind of strategically set off grenades where he thought was a good place to set them off. Fired into the air wildly and really only engaged the enemy when he absolutely had to, showing the faux idea and kind of tricking the Germans into thinking the entire battalion was invading the town. This just kind of caused them to panic and flee, which makes more sense to me since strategically it seems like a smarter idea to make it look like ambushes were happening all over instead of just running and gunning through the streets like it's a movie or something. Plus, not only does Leo say this is what he did in a radio interview, but it lines up with the idea that he wanted to preserve the town and that the only building that would be destroyed in a case like this was the police department if he's not actually causing collateral damage himself. But regardless of what actually happened, this one-eyed madman liberated an entire town from over 1,000 German soldiers. This is the battle statistics right here, and for his actions he was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, which again is the equivalent to a Silver Star. I couldn't find much about Leo's life after World War II, but during the Korean War, Canada did stand up a regiment that was a part of the UN coalition force to assist the US, of which Leo was in a Scout Sniper platoon, and this is where he earned his second medal, and while it is commendable, it wasn't as crazy of an event. See, in October of 51, during the first battle of the Mariang San, the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division held a strategic hill known as Hill 355, or Little Gibraltar. Little Gibraltar was important because it was the key terrain feature of the battlefield, and whoever held it basically controlled the entire region. But on October 22nd, a Chinese force of roughly 40,000 men were able to capture the hill, and while the US did try to retake the hill, they ultimately failed because fighting uphill is extremely difficult. And because the Chinese were able to hold on to it, they expanded their hold on the region as a whole, where they were able to surround a Canadian force in the area, and that's where our phrase Canadian comes in. Leo decided, I'm done with these guys just kind of harassing us, so he took a team of 18 men and snuck up Little Gibraltar, directly past the Chinese lines and into an ambush position near the top of the hill. When the signal was given, Leo and his men opened fire on the Chinese soldiers, who didn't know how to respond to the whole thing because they were being shot at from the inside of the perimeter and not the outside. They didn't know what was going on. Due to the confusion and a combination of artillery and mortar strikes, the Chinese then fled along Leo and his men to control the hill. But the Chinese were only fleeing to regroup with roughly 14,000 reinforcements to conduct a counterattack. At this point, Leo and his boys were ordered to retreat, but remember, Leo is the same guy that took a town by himself, and he was just kind of like, nah, dude, I got this. Don't worry, we got this, guys. And Leo and his Canadian A-team established a defensive perimeter and held their ground throughout the night. But they didn't do all on their own, as they had called in mortar fire that was basically landing right on top of their lines, and that still didn't satisfy Leo. The commanding officer of the mortar platoon that was supporting them actually wrote that Leo wasn't happy with the effects of the mortar rounds and demanded they bring the fires in closer to his position. I think it was in a memoir. The officer actually reported that he could hear his rounds impacting over the radio while he was talking to Leo, and they still were not close enough. Leo and his men actually managed to hold the hill for 3 days, constantly repelling attacks, until the line of demarcation was officially drawn in the front of his position, which the line of demarcation, it was basically that border at the 38th parallel that divides North and South Korea. it was established shortly after he captured the hill. That's what caused them to actually leave. But for leading a group of like 19 dudes into a hectic combat zones, carrying a vital piece of terrain, and holding that terrain for 3 days against literally thousands of enemy soldiers, Leo was awarded his second Distinguished Combat Medal. And remember, he did all that with a missing eye and like some back pain. I couldn't find much else on anything he did during Korea, and as far as I can tell, after the war, he went back home to Quebec and lived a pretty normal life. He had a wife, like 4 or 5 kids, a bunch of grandkids, and he eventually passed away in 2008. And up until recently, he's more or less just kind of flown under the radar outside of a few interviews and people so well still praising him as their hero. I mean, there's a celebration every year on the anniversary of his actions, and the town has named a street after him. But outside of all honoring him, and the museum dedicated to his former unit in Quebec having a few exhibits about him, he just kind of went ignored, and as an ordinary man who did extraordinary things like so many others during the war. But in recent years, he started to get some notoriety. There's a documentary about him. It's in French and available on Amazon for a few bucks. And to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the victory in Europe, the Canadian Post Office put him on a stamp. So he's getting some recognition. If you made it this far into the video, hey, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. You can subscribe if you're new. If you liked it, hit the like button. If you didn't, hey, push the dislike button. Either way, I appreciate you watching this far. I think stories like Leo Majors are really neat, and it kind of sucks that they've kind of been forgotten over time. And a lot of the people that do crazy things like this deserve the recognition that they, deserve to have for it. There are a couple other stories like his that are really neat. If you thought this was neat and looking more, I'd recommend John Bassalone, Carlos Hathcock, the Zippo Man, and that Finnish dude who waged war against the Germans. I can't remember what his name is. But yeah, I mean, I just really like the wild stories about like people during war times and just random periods of history that are just, they're just really interesting. It's like it's weird to believe that these things actually happened and people are able to do these fantastic things. And when I find these stories, I'm just gonna share them every now and then because they're pretty neat. All that being said, once again, thank you for watching. Have a good day. Love you. Bye bye.